Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to the Long-Distance Worklife Podcast, where we help you survive, thrive, arrive alive, whatever in this crazy world of remote and hybrid and the evolving workplace. My name is Wayne Turmel. This is a Marissa-less episode. Marissa will be back next week, but that means I get to talk to somebody really cool about an important topic. And so today we are going to talk about building international teams, working internationally, and probably ruffle a few feathers along the way, I suspect. My guest, he is appearing on screen now, is David Nilssen from Doxa Talent. He is in Boise, Idaho. Hi, David. How are you?
I'm doing great, Wayne. Thanks for having me on today.
Well, thank you for being had. Listen, the question is, who are you and Doxa Talent, and what makes you qualified to talk about this?
Yeah, so Doxa Talent is a socially conscious outsourcing firm. We help companies in the U.S. build and scale up high-performing teams of global talent. What makes me qualified to talk on this topic, we actually have about 1,000 employees across 7 different countries, and we have 0 office space. So I'm I'm passionate about remote work. I think it is the future, and I love talking about this with people, so glad to do it today.
Now, before we started recording, we were having a conversation, and you said something interesting which strikes me as a little paradoxical, which is that you have no office space, but you told me before that you are remote first.
Yes.
How do you square that? How do you make that work with this many people?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have this assumption that the reason why companies go remote is to save money on office space. And the reality is, what I tell people is that when we chose to go fully remote, meaning no office space whatsoever, we weren't remote only, we were remote first. It's not a cost-cutting exercise. It's just a strategic move to embrace what we think are modern workforce trends. And so for us, when we say remote company, it does not mean that we don't ever get together as an organization. So for example, next week, my entire leadership team and other members are flying into Manila, and we're going to have a week-long event where we do some cultural training, where we do some strategic training, we unveil our annual plan, we do some team building, and then we have our annual holiday celebration. And we'll have approximately 700 people ascend on Manila for us to be able to have that. So that's obviously a pretty large expense. We're not saving money, we're just investing it in different ways.
That's really important. I think this is a little sidetracked, but I think it's important. This notion that people look at remote as a way to save money, and therefore investing in getting people together is something we don't need to do because we're remote.
Yeah, I don't think that's actually true. I mean, I do believe that in an office, you have this great opportunity to build relationships, but you generally do it unintentionally. It's through osmosis, right? You and I meet at the water cooler, we have a little coffee together, or we have these crazy events. And I remember, a decade ago when I had everybody in one office in downtown Seattle, we had all these fun events that we would do. And it's really about creating a fun environment. When you move to the remote world, now all of a sudden you don't get a chance to sort of build that connective tissue that you would just build naturally through being in an office. And so we have to sort of create those opportunities in small digestible snippets. And so that's what we're doing in that regard with the group. And the other thing I would say, though, is that also instead of investing what I would call fun, and that's what people often think of culture as, we're investing more in professional development and tools and training and resources to help elevate them as people and professionals along the way.
What kind of skills, when you are putting a team that is going to be remote first and more than that, international, what kind of skills are you looking for?
Well, in our company, we help our clients, I should say, build teams of everything from administrative professionals to finance and accounting, data science, software engineering. So the skill set that they need will vary depending on the type of roles that our clients need them to play. But I would say, aside from that, there are some characteristics of the way people work and the sort of internal needs that they have that are important. So we actually use an assessment to help us as one indicator towards predicting whether this person can be successful in a remote environment. One is, have they done it before? And if they haven't, then we want to understand, are these people autonomous workers, or do they need a lot of direction and sort of support? Are they social people? Because if you have a very high social need, the remote world can actually feel very isolating. For someone who's really a high producing individual who doesn't need a lot of social stimulus, though, it can actually be a very freeing environment. And then the other thing that I would say that we do is we spend a lot of time working with our clients to make sure that they have the right process and systems and collaboration tools and rhythms to get the outcomes that they want from the workers that we have. Because we could provide the best worker in the world, but if the company isn't set up to actually support a remote worker or an international team member, then it may not be successful anyways.
What kind of pushback do you get? What don't they expect they're going to have to do?
The workers or the clients?
The clients. I'm always fascinated. The person with the money makes these decisions in the long run and are largely responsible for whether it works or not, right?
Yeah, the thing that's probably the most surprising, and the place where people are challenged the greatest, working with remote workers, whether they're offshore or onshore, doesn't really matter. The question is, do they have the tools and the sort of rhythms to work with people in a remote environment? Oftentimes we default to in-office practices when we have in-office workers. And so we haven't built the sort of muscles that we need as leaders to make sure that people are clear on the outcomes that are expected of them, to ensure that they've put the right person in the right seat, and that everyone feels like they're on the same playing field. So that would be the first one, is, do they understand how to work with a remote workforce? The second, though, is, do they have standard operating procedures for the roles that are required for people to do similar work constantly, which is often what gets outsourced? They need to have standard operating procedures. Well, what's really interesting to me is I've worked with large-scale organizations up to public companies who didn't really have strong SOPs. And so that tends to be the place where there's the biggest friction point when you're trying to blend international remote with standard work.
Yeah, the notion of this is how we want you to do it. As you say, it happens a fair amount by osmosis when you're in the office. It's kind of in the oxygen that you breathe, which also leads to something else, which is you are very definitely remote first, and you're not a big fan of hybrid work, or at least what a lot of people call hybrid work.
No.
Here's your chance. Here's your soapbox, buddy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I would say my first experience, so pre-pandemic, we were sort of playing with, should we go remote? We had been a centralized organization for almost 2 decades, and the company that I was running at the time. And, we had celebrated culture, but we were starting to get the, people reaching out to us saying, hey, I'm having to move further to afford a home. I want to work here. I love the company, but I can't commute 2 hours a day. Would you be open to this? And so we started playing with that. And we constantly heard little grumblings from our team that was just a bad experience. Well, it became true to me when I was traveling on the road. We're having a leadership team meeting and everyone's sitting around a table. And here I am sitting in cyberspace on a Zoom call. They kept forgetting about me. I wasn't able to barge into the calls. I couldn't read the body language of the people around me. And I realized really quickly that by creating a hybrid environment, we had created 2 classes of people. Those that had access to information, access to leaders, could read the body language, and those that did not. And so when we looked at it, we zoomed out. We said, hey, look, in an office, we build all the same sort of muscles around how do we think about productivity and employee experience, and what management skills and tools do you need, and how do we train people? And the same thing is true in remote. If you're fully remote, you build the same sort of muscles. When you're in a hybrid environment, you have to do both. So you do both and you pay for both, but you can't really be best in class at either. And so for us, we decided we wanted to be a remote organization. We felt like that was the future of the modern workforce, but I'm not against in-office work. I just believe that in the hybrid environment, it's the most expensive and potentially the most dangerous for employee experience.
There you go. Now, some of that, of course, has to do with what we think of as hybrid, and are we aware of these dynamics and taking steps to deal with them, right? Where I'm in violent agreement is when it's done badly, all of those things occur.
Well, you talked about training just a second ago. When you brought that up, I thought, that's a great example of one, right? So when we used to have salespeople that would onboard with us in an office, I would say, "Hey, Wayne, welcome to the company." And I'm overgeneralizing, of course, just to be illustrative here. But hey, great to have you here. You're going to do HR orientation with our HR leader. And then I'm going to have you sit next to Dave. Dave's been in this role for 2 years. You're going to watch him for the next 2 to 4 weeks. You'll pick it up. You'll be great. And that's sort of how people think about training. It's really training by osmosis. But in a remote environment, that is absolutely impossible. So if your company is set up to onboard and train and develop people in an in-office environment that is not aware of or sensitive to the remote workforce, then the remote people get the short end of the stick and oftentimes are much less successful.
Absolutely. So we're going to put a pin in that for the moment. Let's get back to the notion of building an international team. If you're remote first, it probably on some level shouldn't matter, right? In the job and you have the infrastructure, it'll work. I suspect human beings don't work quite that easily. What are some of the challenges when you're putting together an international?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One is most people are actually not terribly clear on what sort of outcomes and activities are required of the people. So I can't tell you how many times I get sent a job description and it looks like somebody took an executive assistant, a finance professional, and a software engineer and just sort of merged them together and said that we're looking for this unicorn. And I think when a company is thinking about outsourcing, they need to be very clear about the specific skill set and outcomes they're looking from a particular role. I know that sounds like table stakes, but it is not. The second thing that I would say is that most people don't really understand.
There is nothing natural. There is nothing natural or simple about doing things naturally and simply.
Yeah, totally true. The second thing we've already covered, which I won't go into, it's the management side of this. I find that most of the time when offshore teams fail, they either have the wrong provider, which is possible, or the management team is not really equipped to deal with both remote or international talent. The remote side we won't talk about because we did just a minute ago. But when it comes to remote workforce, right now, 2 really hot destinations, both of which we serve, are the Philippines and Colombia. And when you think about how do we communicate, how do we evaluate problems within an organization, how do we lead, how do we make decisions, how do we even build trust, how do we disagree? Those are all very different based on the cultures you're in. So I'll give you a couple of examples. One is how we communicate. So, in the Philippines, they've been a country living on these islands for thousands of years. They've learned how to communicate through cultural nuances and a very sophisticated level of communication. Well, then you go to the US, we've been around for 250 years. We're a country of immigrants. We have to be very explicit, what they call low context in the way that we communicate. Philippines, high context, US, low context. So oftentimes, the Filipinos to the Americans can feel avoidant in a conversation when in fact, actually, the way that they communicate is just very, very different. The other thing is how we build trust. So here, I'm very task-based, which is very US-centric, in the way that I build trust. Wayne, you told me you were going to do X. You did it on time and you did it well. I now trust you to do the next thing. In the Philippines, well, they want to have long coffees and lunches and get to know you as a human being and those kind of things before they trust you. And so understanding some of those nuances, they're not wrong, they're just different. But I think a lot of times we expect everyone to be very American in the way that they work, when in fact we also need to be open to and embracing the cultural nuances of the others. So one example of that would be when it comes to giving feedback, in the US, we like more direct feedback, not quite like the Germans, but we like more direct feedback. And then in the Philippines, indirect negative feedback is how you give it. So you have to sort of sandwich the feedback, one positive, a negative, and then another positive in order for them to be able to hear it and understand it. So there's just things like that that make a big difference.
I'm curious, and maybe this is my Canadian American centric brain. It seems to me markets like the Philippines, and this has to do with colonialism and all kinds of things, probably function with Americans a little bit, probably better, but certainly different than a country like Colombia, which is unilingual, which, is there challenges there?
Well, surprisingly, the Colombian culture is actually closer aligned to the American culture in terms of the business environment. The Filipinos, yes, I would say from the standpoint of that it is primarily an English-speaking country. To your point, at one point, Americans had certainly occupied that territory. There's a great alliance from a government standpoint. There's a tax treaty. There's a lot of reasons why you would think that. But they are still very, hierarchical in terms of the way that they operate. It's got to be very prescriptive in terms of what's expected of them. And so just a little bit different, though, in terms of the business environment. They have not quite yet adapted as a full culture in that way. Obviously, there are some people that have been working with American business for a long time, and that's not an issue. But in general, what I've seen is actually the Colombian culture is a little bit further towards or closer aligned to the American way of doing business.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I could geek out on this for a very, very long time. When you go into these markets and looking for talent, are you looking for locals or are you looking for expats who happen to be living there?
No, actually, in fact, I would venture to say I'm not aware of any expats that work for us. These are all local individuals who want to work with and learn from American companies. And so, a lot of the skill sets are the same when it comes to design and email marketing and finance and accounting. A lot of those standard principles are the same. So it actually translates very, very well. But the things that we look at when we go to these markets is there, safety, currency stability, is there the right infrastructure? Both we look at, the possibility of natural disasters, all these sort of things that we look at to say, hey, is business continuity going to be an issue for us for one reason in these particular areas? And so that's one of the things that we look at in addition to time zone and talent density and things like that.
Very, very cool. We are nearing the end of our time already, which is amazing to me. If you are advising somebody to put together an international team that's going to be remote first, that, is going to do this, what are the one or two very first things that they need to do in your mind to be successful?
Yeah, I would say first, I would look at the places in my organization where I need to add excess capacity, but do it in a fiscally responsible way. Or where we have people who could be adding even greater value to the organization doing work that could be potentially moved somewhere else, standard work that could be moved somewhere else so that they can focus their time and energy on higher value added tasks. So that would be the first thing that I would look at. The second thing I would look at is what are some of the things that are on the back burner that have been your perpetual second or third priority that need to get done, but you just haven't yet had the time, energy, or capacity to address? Those are the first two things that I would look at. And then downstream are the things that we talked about, which is making sure you got the right standard operating procedures and the tools and resources to be able to help to collaborate with those individuals.
But deciding why you want to do it and that this is a good business thing to do is probably a good first step. And you'd think that would be a natural thing for people.
Absolutely. You would think so. But I think a lot of people still just believe that outsourcing is really for, low-level tasks. Outsourcing can actually add value in every part of the organization. In my experience, I've seen the further we move up in the org chart, the more value we extract from that experience. And so I would not limit yourself to just thinking about administrative work, more about where are the parts of the organization that you want to advance faster than you are today.
Absolutely. David, thank you so much for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we will have links to David, to Doxa, to the Future is Borderless podcast, which is his podcast. We will have that on our show notes at longdistanceworklife.com. David, I'm going to dismiss you and I am going to wrap up the show here. Thank you so much for being with us, man.
Thanks for having me.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back. Long Distance Work Life is based on the books The Long Distance Leader, Long Distance Teammate, and Long Distance Team. If you want information on our new book, The Long Distance Leader, Revised Rules for Remarkable Remote and Hybrid Leadership. This is the new updated edition. It is available at longdistanceworklife.com/LDL. There are special deals and all kinds of extras that you can get there. If in fact you are interested in our training on this, we have the Long Distance Leadership Series, which is coming up very quickly, a virtual open enrollment class. We would love to have you check that out. Visit at kevinikenberry.com. If you enjoyed today's show, and I certainly enjoyed my conversation with David, it's a podcast. You know how this works. Like and subscribe and tell your friends so that others can find us. That is really about it. If you have a question, a comment, a vicious personal attack, an idea for a guest that you want to tell Marissa and I about, contact us through our LinkedIn page, or you can just simply email us, Wayne at Kevin Eikenberry, Marissa at kevinikenberry.com, and join us there. Thank you so much. Marissa will be with us in our next show. For now, thank you for being with us. Keep your head above water. Don't let the weasels get you down, and we will see you next time.